Up next, we speak to the leader of the official opposition, John Steenhuisen, about a letter he wrote today to President Cyril Ramaphosa requesting an urgent meeting between the head of state and all opposition leaders. Mr. Steenhuisen, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. How did this idea come about, and why do you think it's both urgent and important?
Well, I think it's a follow-up from the meeting that we originally had with the President in the midst of the violence in KwaZulu-Natal almost a fortnight ago. And I certainly made it very clear to the President then that that wasn't the time for accountability, but that we needed to have solutions on the table to get through the problem, and that we can deal with the accountability later. I do believe the time has now come for the accountability. The imminent threat has passed and the situation has stabilized. And I think it is right that the opposition who were called to that original meeting are given a briefing about the state of play in terms of the security cluster. We've got conflicting reports between the State Security Minister, Lodlo, and the Police Minister, Bheki Cele, about who knew what, when they knew it, and what they did or didn't do about it. And I think it's only correct that the opposition, as leaders of parties in the country and who have a role to play in settling down some of the churn and unrest, are brought up to speed with exactly where the problem arose, how we ended up in that situation, and settle once and for all whether it was the security services in terms of the intelligence operations, or whether it was the operationalization of the SABC, where the problems lay and allowed the looting to continue for a few days unchecked.
What do you think is happening as an outsider looking in? What do you think went on here?
Well, not so much an outsider. Having been on the ground during the course of the violence, I very much an inside perspective about what was happening. My information is that there were intelligence reports provided. There was an orange notice that was issued by the State Security Department that was forwarded to the national joints, the NAT joints, which is responsible for receiving intelligence and then operationalizing it. It's chaired by the Commissioner of Police and the military, and it's their job to then operationalize it. I'm also told that there were reports made by the State Security Agency on a daily basis leading up to and during the crisis, but that these were not acted upon. So I think that getting to the bottom of these is going to be essential for us to be able to hold people accountable. We've lost over 300 lives and billions of rands worth of damage, and South Africa's international reputation has been severely dented. I don't think that you can just allow people to walk away without some form of accountability, and also part of a process to make sure it never happens again.
You don't think that on the question of holding ministers to account, that should be President Cyril Ramaphosa's issue to deal with, and perhaps come back and report to the nation? It's his executive, after all, or as Tito Mboweni put it the other day, he is the conductor of the orchestra that is the cabinet.
Yes, and when the orchestra goes wrong and doesn't play the right music or doesn't pitch up for work, it's Parliament's job to hold it accountable. That's how the Constitution sets it very, very clearly out there, that it is Parliament and opposition parties that are responsible for holding the President accountable. I don't think it's good enough that the opposition leaders are just called in to tick a box if necessary. I think that there is a duty on the President to take us into his confidence. I'm not asking him to fire or hire anybody in that meeting. I want the State Security Minister and the Police Minister in the same meeting with all of us so we can find out exactly who knew what, when they knew it, and what they did or didn't do about it. What the President does with that information afterwards is really his own business. I mean, if he wants to keep a rotten security cluster that's let him down and cost the country so badly, well, that's going to be on his head. But I think as the opposition in Parliament, we've got a right to be able to ask those questions. And I think the President has a duty to answer them and to facilitate his executive getting to the bottom and to the truth of of where things went wrong in this terrible crisis.
Which then brings me to the next question, which is it not then the responsibility of those parliamentary committees to do exactly that, to get into the bottom of what actually happened, whether it's the portfolio committee on policing, whether it's the intelligence committee that seemingly hardly functions, or whether it's defense, isn't it the role of those committees, with everything they know and with the powers that the Constitution, gives them, to actually get into the detail of all these things?
I think you've partially answered your own question, Vuyo. I don't think those committees function well at all. And we wouldn't be sitting in this mess with an under-resourced, understaffed, an ill-prepared police service, without a decent crime intelligence operation, and without even the most basic of logistics. We wouldn't be sitting with questions around the intelligence operations. Were those committees doing their work? They haven't. There is no one committee where I believe that all of those agencies, the military, intelligence and the police, can come in together, unless you're going to form an ad hoc committee. But I do think that there was a meeting a fortnight ago with the president and opposition party leaders. That meeting focused on the particular solutions that we believe needed to be implemented immediately. I now think the time for accountability is there, and I don't think that it is odd or unusual for the opposition to be able to ask the president to ask those two ministers to take the opposition leaders through who was ultimately responsible, so we can get to the bottom. So when it comes to Parliament, we know who to call and we know the questions to ask, because it will become very, very clear from that particular meeting whether it was a failure of state security or whether it was a failure of crime intelligence and the SAPS. And I think it'll be able to then allow us to focus that on the particular committee where the problem arose, that we can hold the people accountable, but then also look at solutions to make sure we don't end up in this situation again.
The president, journalists asked the president yesterday whether and when he was going to finally, reshuffle his cabinet. And he said, watch this space, which then suggested that it's something he is about to do. Say he does. Who do you think should go?
Well, I hope it's not the same space he's asked us to watch, that he asked us to watch on Eskom, on SAA and all those other places, because that space is not filled with a very happy space at the moment. Look, it's the president's prerogative about who he chooses and who he does not choose. I think he's been badly let down by his security cluster. I don't think that he had all the information that he required at his fingertips to be able to make some of those decisions. I don't think he was properly appraised about what was happening on the ground. So I think that there's some room for movement in the security cluster. And I definitely think that it's time that he pulls the guillotine down now on Minister Mkhize. We're in the midst of a health pandemic. We've got an acting health minister. I think that there are parts of the SIU report are starting to leak out every single day. And I think that's damaging for the president, because he's sitting on that report. And I don't think it takes more than 2 weeks to go through a SIU report that seems to have made, to my readings of the tribunal, that very damning findings against the minister. Why is there this vacillation? The country needs a full-time health minister. We've got a health minister who's been on special leave, and I don't think it's serving the president or the country well. So it's not for me to say who he must choose for his cabinet, but I think that those are some areas where he's going to have to look very, very carefully at bringing in some capacity, because he's being let down in that regard.
We actually run out of time, but I have to ask you this. What if the president wants to say, hey, John Steenhuisen, let's all dirty our hands. Don't you want to come on board? I'll give you a portfolio to run. What would you say?
Well, obviously, we'll have to consider it and to see what the terms were. I mean, I've said very, very often that, we want to be part of the solution in South Africa, and that we're the president's partners in the rational centre around, fixing South Africa. I think that there's many instances where we agree with what the president's trying to do, the fact that he's being held back by people in his own party, but we'd have to look at what the terms are of that. If it meant that we, would have to give up, independence, etc., we would have to examine that. But my party and I stand very, very ready to get our hands dirty and to offer our expertise and experience in helping to rebuild South Africa. We're in a really bad space at the moment. We've got a hydra of crises, of financial, health, economic, social crises, and I think it's time for the country to come together to find solutions for these things, which makes me very cross that Parliament is closed still and hasn't been recalled. This is a time when the best heads in South Africa should be around the table, not in the sand, and I think that we should be discussing these things.
Thank you very much, John Steenhuisen, for your time. He is, of course, the leader of the opposition, of the official opposition, the Democratic Alliance. Today, he wrote a letter to the president asking him to meet urgently with opposition leaders. And that's where we're going to leave it this evening. Do join us again on Monday. From me and the rest of the team, have a good evening and a great weekend.